everyone. Wasn't that an excellent presentation? I was really struck by that idea of urban acupuncture, how we think specifically about what those interventions are that work to really change the paradigm in our space. We're going to spend a little bit of time talking about this concept of connectivity in a variety of different ways. And the Denver region has been really focused on this question of connectivity, particularly, I think, as we've been expanding our mass transit system. A little over a decade ago, we really decided to make an investment in connecting our region and began our Fast Tracks build out, which when fully complete will be 122 miles of rail and BRT, almost 80 stations. We're at a point in the development of that build out and that infrastructure where we're really turning our attention to some of the things that we've forgotten. How do we move around our neighborhoods? How do we move around our districts? What does it look like to really connect people to that investment that we've made? And how do we move beyond the physical into the social? So I have with me four really wonderful and esteemed panelists. To my left, Nicole Dalmy is the general manager of the Denver region for Zipcar. So we'll be talking a little bit about that shared economy, shared paradigm piece in her comments. Aileen McCallum is the director of downtown environment for the Downtown Denver Partnership, so thinking really deeply in one of our neighborhoods about connectivity in all of its forms. Jeff Friesem is the U.S. managing director and partner at the Gell Institute, and then Tony Pickett is the vice president of master site development for the Urban Land Conservancy. So Jeff, I'm actually going to start with you. I know that you've been working here in Denver, really working to reimagine the 16th Street Mall and our downtown community, and that you've been advocating for an approach that is really a people-first, action-oriented planning concept. Can you talk to folks about what that is, how that's developing in Denver, and if there are environments in which that's a particularly effective approach?
Yeah, absolutely. So pleasure to be here. Thanks. People first, from our perspective, is a little bit of a change of paradigm also from the placemaking perspective. So placemaking is fantastic, but for us, that's doesn't tell the whole story. And so if we focus more on the people in places, that means that we need to go out and engage people where they are. So what we do is a lot of analysis and observational analysis, actually, where we go to people out on the street and find out things that they are expert in. So oftentimes we ask people questions like, what's your favorite place in the city? Or where places do you like to spend time? And then we can learn more about those qualities that matter to them most. And we do something else too, which is based on observing people in their natural environment. So we go out with a ton of volunteers from here in Denver. It's been a lot of folks from the partnership and university students, and go out and measure where people are walking, their age and gender, talk to them about their income status, find out what activities they're doing. And so in that way, we're really measuring what we care most about, which is about how is this coexistence and shared space happening, who is out there, and what activities are taking place. This is an incredible form of engagement as well, actually, because if all of you have probably been to typical engagement processes where you invite people to a meeting, and the people that go to those meetings are usually old, white, and angry. And that's not necessarily representative of our cities. Maybe some neighborhoods, but that's not representative of our city. So this gives us a new form of engagement. The other aspect of that is this action-oriented piece, right? So we believe for too long, planning has sort of been done in closed rooms and by a certain group of the population, and so action-oriented means, doing test projects. And so we've been doing this in Denver as well. It's really started back in New York, but in the Denver context, over the last few summers, we've reimagined what the 16th Street Mall could look like by testing it. We don't, draw a diagram and then fight about if that diagram will work or not. We've actually worked with RTD, worked with the city, rerouted some of the buses along the street, activated the space in a new way, engaged a lot of different community groups, cultural institutions to express what they want to see as a authentic Denver experience on the mall, on 16th Street, with these test pilot projects. Then we can go out as citizens, city leaders, all kinds of different stakeholders, and again experience together what that action looks like, learn from it, measure how it works or how it doesn't from a people perspective, and then inform longer-term planning processes. So if we have this people first, that's sort of the measure part, action-oriented. We talk a lot about that being the test and refine. And through that, I think what we're hopefully doing is, connecting people to opportunity, shortening the gap between decision maker and citizen, creating common ground between different citizens in a way that's rooted in the actual use of public space. And we're learning lessons about how we want to invest through those iterative, incremental, small pilot projects.
That's really interesting, and this is a just quick follow-up question, I think, both to Jeff and Aileen. A big piece of conversation as we think about revisioning the 16th Street Mall and downtown is the question of who that space is for, and how you think about the variety of uses and people, particularly people experiencing homeless who are also on the 16th Street Mall. I'm curious, from an equity perspective, when you think about the people first approach, how does that factor in to this set of work?
Well, I think it's key to it. I think one thing. How many of you guys are local Denverites? Right. So we know that, the 16th Street Mall has probably never been more sort of front and center in the media right now, right? So everyone's talking about the street, and a lot of it has to do with, homelessness or violence or crime. But I think there's also something that's happening is that a lot more people have experienced the street. They've experienced it during these incredible test periods that we've had, where we've had, vibrant, dynamic, diverse uses of the street that hadn't been seen before during these Meet in the Street weekends. And so people's expectations are being elevated. They expect to see more families, more high and low income groups. They expect it to be safer. They expect it to be more vibrant and encouraging, and now they're demanding more. And so right now, a lot of city leaders in Denver are freaking out. They're like, oh, we gotta do something at the mall. And we're saying, well, we are doing something incrementally, and actually by doing that, by inviting more people to the table, it gets a little messier. We have to take the good with the bad and have a more constructive conversation. But it is more complicated than the closed door silver bullet, only hear the voices of folks that agree with you type of traditional approach by inviting more opinions to the conversation.
So I think I'm going to follow up what Jeff's talking about and bring it back a little bit to transportation connectivity, which I think can also answer your question about equity and mobility. And I think that in downtown Denver, since I've been working at the partnership, we've really focused on making downtown Denver full of different multimodal options and making it friendly to all different types of ways that people want to get into downtown. And by making sure that it's people friendly by pedestrianizing all the streets and making sure that people feel comfortable walking down the street, and that people feel comfortable taking transit in downtown, and people feel comfortable riding their bikes to downtown, and in some cases, making sure people feel comfortable driving their cars downtown. We've made downtown Denver accessible to a broad range of individuals. And I think that's really important, to not assume that people are just going to drive their cars downtown, or we're just going to make it accessible that way, because that limits a certain group of people depending on their financial capabilities or where they can live in this city. We want to make sure that downtown Denver is accessible to all types of people, and that's kind of part of the conversation too that relates to back to what Jeff's studying here in downtown.
Aileen, we hear a lot about downtown Denver, and I think you have done a really phenomenal job, and the partnership has been a huge piece of really leveraging resources to bring those multimodal options to downtown. Do you think that's to the exclusion of other neighborhoods in the city? And how do you think that kind of investment in downtown either contributes to or takes away from what's happening in other parts of Denver?
We've definitely gotten some criticism like that, and strong questions of, hey, what about my neighborhood? And I want to make sure we're building protected facilities, protected bike lanes in my facility, and I want transit facilities in my neighborhood. And I always say we are not trying to only devote resources into downtown Denver. My goal is to make downtown Denver as multimodal friendly as possible, but that doesn't work if we can't connect to anything. So my hope is that I can be successful in my work and collaborate and work with partners in adjacent neighborhoods and throughout the city and share lessons learned and share strategies and work with them to make sure that connections are being built not only in downtown Denver, but throughout the city so that everyone can enjoy not only downtown Denver, but the entire city.
Interesting. Nicole, I want to bring your voice into the conversation a little bit as we're talking about multiple modes. I think that Julian really put forth a strong challenge to us to think about the shift from shared economy to shared paradigm. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, from the perspective of Zipcar, how are you thinking about that? What's your current model, your current demographics, and as you think about the future of shared mobility services and your model in particular, how could you see it expanding to be an even more accessible model?
Yeah, I think Denver is very new to car share. Zipcar has been around for almost 17 years. But it's only been in Colorado for the past 3 years. So what we have seen as a company is that obviously it has worked and been very successful in large metropolitan cities, as well as kind of test cases in universities. We're in almost over 500 universities nationwide. But what we have done in the last 3 years is actually come to smaller metropolitan cities. So not only Denver, but Dallas, Austin, Detroit, Milwaukee. And what we have found is that car share and the sharing mobility is successful not only in major cities, but also in smaller metropolitan cities as well. And what we do and what we strive as a company to do is to provide options for residents that live in a city to either be what we call car light, which is dropping one of the cars, or car free, and being able to take public transportation or walking to work. And then if you need a car, that is available to you. We tried to make them within a few blocks. We are a membership-based organization, which I think is very helpful. We listen to our members. They comment to us of where they'd like to see cars, and we do everything possible to try to place them near bus stops. And we have members who have moved here from major cities, and they have moved to Aurora, and they miss their car share. They don't want to own a car. So we try to place them as close to possible to a bus stop as we work our way into other cities here in the metro area, and work with these members. It's amazing what people are willing to do to not own a car. We have a member who moved in Aurora, and I've been working with him directly to say, okay, this is where we're going to be. He'll calculate his entire bus route on how long it will take him to get to a car when he needs it. And I know people are sometimes afraid of cars. With Zipcar, we take about 13 to 15 cars off the road. We do an annual survey every year that talks about what our members are doing and how they use transportation. And I can tell you a year ago, Denver, on their utilization for the city, we have grown dramatically, and people have been dropping owning cars here in Denver and the metro area, and they're trying to think of alternate solutions on how they can use multiple ways of transportation to make their lives more efficient. And it's really amazing for me to be a part of it because our company in car share has been around for so long. But Denver, we're a startup, and it's really cool to see people who are changing, and I think it's awesome for Denver.
Can you talk a little bit about the demographics of your membership?
Yeah, so a lot of people think that obviously universities kind of make them think that it is the millennial generation that actually uses Zipcar. We have different demographics in almost every city. Colorado actually skews to be an older demographic than any other city. They also have children in the demographic. So they're about 35 to 45 is the average demographic for a car share member here in Colorado. And usually they're highly educated, they're second degree, and household income does tend to be higher. It tends to be around 6 figures. And so we kind of see these in Denver as early adopters, and not to say that we don't have all types of members, because we definitely offer rate plans and, in options for all levels. That just tends to be who's been the early adopters here in Colorado.
So Tony, moving from driving to walking, I know that the Urban Land Conservancy has been doing really successful work over the last 13 years of really investing in place for community benefit. And that more recently, I've been watching this trend where you've been thinking kind of above the single development level, more at the neighborhood or even the district level. And I wonder if you could talk about kind of where that trend is coming from for you and some of the things that you're doing in that space.
Sure. Well, just to start off, Urban Land Conservancy is a little bit of a hybrid organization. We're both a community land trust and a land bank. So we've been making investments in Denver around TOD and in other locations to really preserve those real estate investments as assets for the community. We found ourselves in the fortunate position of having a concentration of those assets in Northeast Denver, specifically around Northeast Park Hill, which is a neighborhood in Northeast Denver. It is actually distinctive because it's the last remaining predominantly African American neighborhood in Denver because of the demographic shift with new people moving here. So back in 2013, we bought a vacant 9.4 acre site directly adjacent to the new 40th and Colorado station. If you rode the A line in from the airport, you passed right by it, and targeted that for equitable development, making sure that it would have some community benefit. We did a lot of community outreach, came up with several scenarios of what could possibly be on the site, and then sought partners to help us implement the vertical improvements. And I'm proud to say when the A-line opened, we had our first phase opening of 156 affordable units, again, putting people in place at the transit, making sure that they had access to work opportunities that would come from living affordably right there next to the transit station. But one of the big issues that came up during almost a 2-year community process was the fact that the existing neighborhoods, the existing single-family neighborhoods that surround that station, because of the lack of investment over decades, had no real bike or pedestrian infrastructure to reach the station. And so drawing on some of my experiences from Atlanta, because I moved here to Denver from Atlanta about 3 years ago and worked with Ryan and other Beltline supporters early on to realize that vision, I pulled some of that experience and said, well, why don't we look at a district scale approach to bike and pedestrian connection, solving this first last mile connections issue that we talk about in such wonky terms, but making it real for people and theming that around the local culture of those communities. So we got this grant from Art Place America. I didn't know what I was doing. I just applied out of the blue. They came, did a site visit, selected us, and gave us $250,000 and said, go out and create a vision and show us how you can do this. And so we're creating what we call now the 303 Artway, which again links multiple communities to that transit station, not just Northeast Park Hill, but all the way to City Park, which is Denver's iconic green space, connecting the Museum of Science and Nature and neighborhood retail and entertainment centers, again, to that transit station, and really taking transit-oriented development and looking at it, again, in this very holistic way and saying, how can we really leverage and maximize the kinds of investments that we're making? And we didn't make those investments alone. We had partnership from the City Office of Economic Development, from local foundation community in the form of program-related investments. Again, trying to bring everybody to the table and really achieve some equity, distribute those benefits and burdens of making those kinds of improvements in infrastructure in those communities. And coincidentally, when we proposed that concept, the city emerged and said that they needed to do a major stormwater infrastructure project, the Platte to Park Hill 2-basin project. Over $300 million will be invested in improving stormwater infrastructure. Well, it coincidentally overlaps with the route of the 303 Artway, so we can use some of those dollars, again, to be intentional about what the infrastructure benefit looks like for those communities.
Tony, I think you're making a really important point about layering benefits and, kind of that idea of how when we're making investments anyway, we're able to really bring both some of those equity objectives, some of those other resilience objectives into the conversation. I want to ask one more question, and I'm going to then turn it to take a couple of audience questions. So be thinking while I ask this. The last panel, I thought, made some really eloquent points about the tensions of gentrification and displacement in our community, and something that I know that many communities are experiencing across the nation. A real thing that we hear from community residents is that when you make these kinds of infrastructure investments and improvements, that they don't actually reap the benefits, because as the improvements are made, people are more attracted to the neighborhoods and people end up getting pushed out. I wonder if you could talk about, for any of you, how are you thinking about that as you're making these investments, simultaneously supporting strategies to help keep people in place?
I'll go first because that's actually top of mind for us right now. Given that Mayor Hancock has this vision for the corridor of opportunity, a $5 billion future economy for Denver along the A-line, which is right and perfect, but really making sure that the low-income families of color can stay in place to benefit from the corridor of opportunity has been sort of one of our pushes. And I actually want to shift some of the conversation and the terminology from talking about displacement to what I like to call in-placement. How can we keep people in the communities? How can we keep businesses in the communities? We're right now developing not just housing to keep people in place and permanently affordable housing using the community land trust model, so a one-time investment can continue to create affordable housing for multiple families, but also how do we create quality education facilities, a point that was brought up earlier. We just finished a high-performing K-5 elementary school using long-term land leasing to make it affordable for the charter school, but focused on serving low-income kids of color from that community, making sure that they have that commitment early on. So again, making sure that there are educational advantages, affordable housing, also workforce training, putting some programs in place so that as we create infrastructure, it creates new job opportunities. Well, those are middle skill level jobs, and if we could create a program focused on those communities to get people into that job pipeline, that's another avenue to allow people to increase their income and stay in place. So again, if I can stress it strongly enough, stop talking about displacement and start talking about in-placement.
I also, yes, please. I want us to talk about how difficult gentrification is and economic, creating really great neighborhoods and some of the negative consequences of that. It's difficult, and it's really wonderful when a new area of town becomes extremely popular because of new infrastructure investments or private sector investments that have just made it very attractive. We can't just lay down and say, oh, we did it, and that's it. We have to think really holistically about building neighborhoods. We're city builders, and we need to take responsibility for that and be very aware that we have to think about economic or housing opportunities for all different levels of people in our economy, and making sure that there's education opportunities in all of our neighborhoods, that there's great restaurants in all of our neighborhoods, and there's great public places in all of our neighborhoods. And so when a neighborhood starts taking off, it's really imperative that us city leaders and city builders come on in and make sure that that whole ecosystem is being built.
Let's take a couple of your questions. What's coming up for you? Right here. That was a hand shooting up. Can we get a microphone?
Thank you. This is a great subject because of the fact that, new models and those of us who are trying to work with folks like you. When you say, it's very hard, there's a lot of us from the community level as well as from different circles that come to you and, say, okay, here's a model that we might want to look at. How do we do a better job of working with you on, meeting these models, especially with economic development?
Persistence. I really do think it's persistence and just continuing to make connections and networking and bringing that conversation to business leaders, the civic leaders, and saying, hey, I'm here. This is a difficult conversation, but I'm here at the table willing to have this conversation with you, and let's think creatively, let's think outside the box, but we really need to make this economically viable for everyone.
Economic development professionals to now make avenues for these, more avenues. See, it's been a push to, like, there's been this false sense of civic engagement, and then there's this pushing. And is there a way for us to think of more models of really engaging? So, like, I came back from Canada, and Canada has all these grants and everything for entrepreneurship and social entrepreneurship, and the same thing in New Zealand and other places. But here in the US, we don't have a way of really giving our folks money to be able to create those SMEs and the new set. So it's like bringing the land trust and growing these communities, but really where you're saying that investment from the granting level. So it's like the two of you working together and then engaging the community and saying, we have some money. It's not just the idea that we're wanting your ideas, but what we're gonna do is we're gonna put you to work actually doing these things so that you can actually be a part of the vibrancy. And so that's something that, I think that, being able to hear from you is to how are you engaging the community with these new models? Because we often have people come from Scandinavia and other places, but they can come because their education is paid for and they have funding to do that, where we in America don't.
Sounds like what you're really talking about, right, is that shift from shared economy to shared paradigm, right? And how we really create new models where we're working really together in genuine partnership and not really eliminating some of that power dynamic.
And I think you're touching on this idea of community empowerment.
Yes.
And really the land trust model, the traditional model, carries with it resident participation in the governance decision making so that they really have a place at the table consistently throughout the process, not just at the beginning when you're planning it, but when you're actually making financial decisions. And there's some education that goes along with that. So in order to help folks grasp all of the complexities, there has to be some ongoing education about it so they can make an informed decision about what's happening.
Yeah, I think great point, bringing all of the complexities in. Another question from the audience?
Hi, my name is Alina Jha, and I'm with the Mayor's Office of Sustainability in Atlanta, and we have an eco-district, so we're part of the eco-district team there.
Can I have you hold the microphone a little?
Sorry. So we're part of the eco-district team in Atlanta. And I wanted to kind of ask this question that may not have too much to do with a lot of the work that you guys have done, but I'm just really wondering about, we're talking about place, a sense of place, we're talking about sharing, and these interconnected communities. And you brought up the topic of homelessness. And I'm from San Francisco, and right now we're facing huge gentrification, and with gentrification comes displacement, and often with displacement comes homelessness, along with the homelessness that's already been in that community. And when we think of who is the population we're sharing with, who do we consider when we talk about infrastructure? This wonderful mall, 16th Street Mall, who is it that we are designing that for? And how do we address people who maybe don't have a place and maybe aren't considered within that shared community?
That's a really good, tough question. I think that some of it, to be honest, a couple thoughts. Some of it, Rob said we should try to provoke something. Getting back to this place issue, right? I think it's misguided us a little bit in terms of just the place, because then we just depend on urban designers and architects to solve some really deep societal issues that have to do with economic development and social justice and homelessness. And so it seems like we have to be thinking beyond placemaking into, this is in the ethos of eco-districts as well, right? But even more people-focused and understanding that there are different needs in these different communities, and we have to build bridges between place together with mental health organizations. That's a big deal in San Francisco, with economic and workforce development, with training for new jobs. And so it's a challenge for us to really think much more holistically in our silos of work, whether that be in government or not, much more holistically to solve those issues, because it's not purely design, it's not purely any single issue. So I think the holisticness is the key. That's challenging. It means we have to have a shared set of vocabulary, and it's going to take us more time to change some governance structures, finance structures, to really get to the heart of it.
And talking about homelessness specifically, I took a group of folks to San Francisco about 18 months ago, and business leaders, and we talked about homelessness, and we met with the homelessness, I think, czar over there, and he talked about building facilities that are for homeless people that they'll feel comfortable in. So he talked about how they were just about to open a facility that was directed just for the LGBTQ community there, because homeless LGBTQ folks didn't feel comfortable going to the other homeless facilities. And so what struck me about that comment was, wow, we need to be building places that serve our homeless community and folks that have mental illnesses that they feel comfortable in, so that I would feel comfortable in. If I were in that spot, if I was a woman who's homeless or children, I would want to go to a place that makes me feel comfortable. And that's just being human and being empathetic and taking care of people. And I think we sometimes forget, would I go to this place if I fell into hard times? And I think we need to think about that a little bit more when we talk about building social service programs. And also when we talk about building cities and building places, would I go there, and would people not quite like me feel comfortable there too?
I think it's also thinking in a really specific way about the policy construct that creates the experience of homelessness. I see so much in our city that, so much of the kind of rhetoric and paradigm is that it's about mental illness, that it's about substance abuse, that it's about urban travelers. But what we also know is that it's about people whose rents are going up by $200 a month because they're on a month-to-month lease, people who don't have any protections around evictions. Those are things that are creating homelessness as well. And so I think until we really start having a conversation about what those root causes are, we're not going to address that set of issues. Okay, we've got time for one more question. I see a mic exchange already happening. Have at it.
Thank you for having me. I'm David Capelli. My question is, what policies is Denver drafting around home ownership and small business ownership in the digital transition? Touching on the last couple of questions on homelessness, gentrification, et cetera. In the 50s and 60s, American dream was to own a home and own a business. We've kind of gone away from that. My question is, what specific policies are gone to home ownership to build this equity and inclusion in the digital transition?
Yeah, I'd say we have sort of an interesting sort of perfect storm of things happening. We have this incredible growth. We have the marijuana industry as a new economy coming in. And in fact, again, in trying to promote this community land trust model, we're now looking at the home ownership side. We've been primarily dealing with the multifamily rental side on long-term land leased property, but now we're shifting that a little bit to look at exploring creating more of the home ownership side of things. But we're competing, in a lot of cases, with those same marijuana growers who are able to make cash offers for the properties that we're trying to buy from them. So there's a bit of capitalism being navigated in all of that. On top of that, we have this really interesting thing in Colorado called construction defects, which, again, raises the price of for-sale condominium product to the point where there is really no affordable entry-level product being produced. So we've got to unwind that policy, and it was an unforeseen outcome of a really well-intended policy to protect consumers from shoddy workmanship. But again, having that construction defects problem really makes making the transition from renting to home ownership somewhat challenging. Again, there's not enough single-family product on the ground to meet the demand, so the price is high. There's not enough entry-level condominium multifamily product because of construction defects. So we're trying to figure out policy-wise, how do we attack construction defects? How do we bring new models for long-term single-family affordability to the table at the same time?
So with that is a BMR home ownership program. So a rent-to-own with BMR, so avoiding these poverty traps that we see. So really looking at the economic development and the ownership, because if you don't own a home or a small business, this leads to the inequities, the gentrification, the displacement, et cetera, and then that actually is going to be greater as we see these jobs being automated. So looking at what are these poverty traps and then changing them to actually have an ownership model, BMR to home ownership, instead of the cyclical rent. Because there's also this misconception that it's extreme low-income people. It's also millennials, people getting into the workforce. And we know that those jobs aren't going to be there. So how do you guys avoid these poverty traps and poverty capitalism?
All right, I think that's a great, passionate end. Let's go ahead and wrap it up. Please join me in thanking our panelists.